The alien queen, Zarina, stood tall on the grand balcony of her palace, overlooking the vast city below. Her eyes, glowing with the power of her people, scanned the horizon of her empire. For centuries, she ruled with an iron grip, her species dominating countless galaxies. With advanced technology, unmatched intelligence, and unrivaled strength, Zarina's people saw themselves as the greatest in the universe. To them, other species, especially humans, were nothing more than primitive creatures. Zarina often laughed at the thought of humans, a species so young and fragile, relying on crude tools and basic technology. They had no true understanding of the cosmos, and their violent history only made them appear weak in her eyes. To her, they were nothing more than a passing curiosity, something to observe but not engage with. However, the day of the intergalactic summit had arrived, and the Queen had to meet with representatives from many species, including humans. Her advisors informed her that a human envoy, a diplomat named Michael, had been chosen to represent Earth. Zarina sneered at the thought. What could a human possibly offer that would warrant the Queen's attention? When Michael entered the grand chamber, he did so with a quiet confidence. He wore simple attire, a sharp contrast to the ornate robes and intricate armor worn by the alien dignitaries. His presence was unremarkable at first, yet Zarina found herself studying him more closely than she had anticipated. There was something about him that intrigued her, but she dismissed it quickly. He was, after all, just a human. "Your Majesty," Michael said, bowing politely. His voice was calm, unwavering, as if he had faced kings and queens before. "It's an honor to be here." Zarina nodded curtly but did not speak. She examined him carefully, her gaze sharp and cold. "What can you, a human, possibly offer that would interest me?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Michael's eyes met hers with steady resolve. "We offer more than you may think," he replied. "Humans have survived against impossible odds, built civilizations, and reached for the stars. We may be different, but we've learned to endure." Zarina's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had heard the same tired stories from other species, but something in Michael's words lingered in the air. His confidence was unshakable, and there was a fire in his eyes that she hadn't expected. She was used to seeing fear in the eyes of others when they stood before her, but not him. This human was different. "You speak of survival, but that's all you know." "Survival," Zarina said, her voice cold, but the words felt empty as they left her mouth. "Your people are primitive, barely advanced enough to be considered worthy of our time." Michael didn't flinch, "And yet we are still here, Your Majesty. Against every obstacle, we stand. That's something not every species can say." Zarina blinked, momentarily caught off guard by his response. This human, this simple creature from Earth, had just shown her a side of humanity that she had not considered. Perhaps she had underestimated them, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. There was no reason for her to think more of him. He was, after all, just a human. But as the meeting continued, Zarina couldn't shake the feeling that this human had more to offer than she was willing to admit. For the first time in a long while, she was curious. Zarina watched Michael closely as the meeting continued. He sat across from her, calm and composed, his eyes steady as he spoke about Earth's history and the struggles humanity had faced. He talked about their wars, their mistakes, but also their victories and the resilience they had shown over time. His voice was confident, but it wasn't the arrogance of someone trying to impress. It was the kind of confidence that came from survival, from overcoming challenges time and time again. Zarina couldn't help but listen, though she kept her expression impassive. She had seen many species in her long life, each boasting about their achievements and their strength. Most of them were quick to flatter her, knowing how powerful she was. But Michael was different. He didn't flatter her. Instead, he spoke as though they were equals, something she wasn't used to. The Queen's gaze never left him as he continued speaking. She found his words intriguing. He didn't deny humanity's flaws. Instead, He embraced them, acknowledging that their strength came from their ability to learn from their mistakes, to grow despite the odds. She found that fascinating. No other species had ever dared speak to her like that. "You see," Michael said, his voice carrying a deep sincerity, "we may not have the technology or the power you have, but we have something else. We have hope. We have the drive to keep moving forward, no matter what the universe throws at us." Zarina was taken aback. Hope. It was such a simple word, but it held a weight she hadn't expected. In her empire, hope was seen as a weakness. It was something her people had long since abandoned, replaced by cold logic and domination. And yet, here was this human, telling her that hope was a source of strength, that it was the reason humanity had managed to survive for so long. She couldn't understand it, but something about it resonated with her. For a moment, she considered asking him more about this hope, but the thought passed as quickly as it had come. She was the queen of an empire that spanned across galaxies. What could she possibly learn from a human? But even as she dismissed the thought, she found herself staring at Michael a little longer than necessary. Michael, sensing the queen's growing interest, continued, "We've seen what happens when we give up. Our history is filled with the consequences of those who chose to stop fighting, to stop trying. We learned that in order to survive, we need to keep moving, keep improving, even if it's just one step at a time." Zarina couldn't deny that his words had an effect on her. The alien queen had spent so many years surrounded by beings who saw power as the ultimate goal. To hear someone speak of survival not through strength, but through persistence and learning, was something entirely new. And it made her uncomfortable. For a moment, she even wondered if she had misjudged humanity entirely. But no, she reminded herself. They were still primitive, still far beneath her. She was the ruler of an empire that could destroy entire planets with the flick of a finger. No human could ever match that power. And yet, the more she listened to him, the more she realized that there was something about this human that kept drawing her in. His words, his unshakable confidence, and the spark of intelligence in his eyes, they made her question everything she thought she knew about humanity. Zarina stood up abruptly, ending the conversation. "This meeting is over," she said, her voice cold and firm. But as she turned to leave, she couldn't help but feel that something had shifted inside her. She couldn't ignore the feeling that this human was not what she had expected, and that made her both intrigued and wary. As the queen left the room, Michael sat back, a small smile on his face. He had made an impression, and that, he knew, was only the beginning. Zarina's curiosity about Michael grew in the days that followed their first meeting. She couldn't stop thinking about his words, how he spoke of hope and humanity's ability to endure. It was a concept that felt foreign to her, something her people had long abandoned. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she needed to see if the human's resilience was real. Could he back up his words with action? The queen decided to test him. At the next summit, she stood before the gathered leaders of several galactic races, including Michael. Her voice echoed through the chamber as she announced, "I will challenge the human envoy to a test of strength. Not physical strength alone, but also his intellect and resilience. Let him prove his worth." The crowd murmured in surprise. Zarina's challenges were usually reserved for the most powerful of beings, but a human. Many doubted he could even make it through. Michael, however, stood tall, his eyes meeting the queen's with quiet confidence. "I accept," he said calmly, his voice unwavering. There was no fear in him, only determination. Zarina studied him carefully, noting the way he carried himself. She couldn't help but wonder if he truly understood the scale of the test he was about to face. The challenge began the following day in the Queen's private arena, a place where the most intense and difficult trials took place. Zarina had designed the test to push the human to his limits. It would combine physical combat, strategy, and the ability to withstand mental pressure. The first stage of the test was a series of obstacle courses designed to test speed, agility, and physical endurance. Zarina's warriors, trained in the most difficult terrains, had failed many times in the past. The courses were brutal, sharp spikes, moving platforms, and areas of extreme heat. Most participants would have been forced to quit within minutes, but Michael seemed undeterred. As he moved through the course, Zarina watched in silence. His movements were not the graceful agility of the alien warriors, but they were filled with determination and raw endurance. At times, he stumbled, but he never gave up. He pushed through the pain, the exhaustion, and the fear. Zarina could see the strain in his face, but also a deep resolve in his eyes. By the end of the obstacle course, Michael was covered in sweat and bruises, but he had completed it. The audience, which had been skeptical at first, was now watching him with growing respect. Zarina was not easily impressed, but she found herself impressed nonetheless. She had never seen a being so human show such perseverance. Most beings, even the strongest ones, would have faltered. But Michael kept going. The second stage of the test was a strategy game, one of the Queen's favorites. The game was designed to test the mind, requiring the participant to outthink and outmaneuver an opponent. Zarina herself was the opponent. She was known for her brilliance in strategy, and many of the best tacticians in the galaxy have fallen to her mind games. As the game began, Zarina watched Michael carefully. He wasn't as quick as some of her best tacticians, but his approach was different. He didn't rely on memorized strategies or advanced technology. Instead, he focused on reading the patterns of the game, thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. His mind worked in ways Zarina hadn't expected. The game lasted longer than Zarina had anticipated, but in the end, Michael won. It wasn't a victory built on superior intellect or tactics, but on his ability to adapt and learn from each move. He had outsmarted her, not with brute force, but with creativity and resilience. Zarina was stunned. She had underestimated the human's ability to endure, to learn, and to grow. For the first time, she was forced to confront the truth. Humans were not as primitive as she had thought. There was something in them, something deep within, that made them stronger than she had ever realized. As the test ended, the crowd erupted in applause. Michael, though exhausted, smiled softly. Zarina couldn't help but acknowledge the quiet power in his smile. She had thought she would break him, but instead, he had shown her a side of humanity she could never have imagined. She approached him, her voice soft yet firm. "You have earned my respect, human." Michael looked up at her, a spark of satisfaction in his eyes. "Thank you, Your Majesty, but I'm just getting started." Zarina, for the first time, wasn't sure what to expect next, but she knew one thing for certain. Things were changing between them. Over the next few days, Zarina couldn't shake the image of Michael from her mind. She had expected him to fail, to fall short like so many others who had faced her trials. Instead, he had done the impossible. He had survived, and even triumphed where others had crumbled. The Queen sat alone in her chamber, gazing out over her empire. Her mind wandered back to the test. She replayed every moment in her head. From Michael's determination in the obstacle course to the way he had outmaneuvered her in the strategy game. It was not his physical strength or intelligence that impressed her the most, but something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words. There was a resilience in him, a drive that didn't come from brute force or logic, but from something far more powerful: hope. Zarina had never understood hope. Her empire was built on power, control, and logic. Hope was a concept for those who were weak, those who had nothing else to rely on. But when she had watched Michael push himself through the trials, she had seen hope in his eyes. It wasn't just the hope of survival, but the hope for something greater, something better. That was what unnerved her. Zarina had always thought of herself as the supreme ruler, the one whose will shape the galaxy. To her, humans were nothing more than fleeting creatures who were too busy fighting amongst themselves to ever build anything of lasting value. But Michael, with his unwavering hope, was showing her a side of humanity that she had never seen. Could it be that humans had something her people lacked? Something that made them stronger in ways that technology and power could never replicate? The Queen stood up abruptly, her gaze still lost in thought. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She had never experienced anything like this before. Was she intrigued? Was she actually beginning to respect a human? The thought both frustrated and fascinated her. She had always been certain that her empire was the pinnacle of civilization, that her people were the best the universe had to offer. The idea that a species like humanity, so young, so flawed, could possess something her people did not was both unsettling and intriguing. Later that day, Zarina found herself seeking Michael out. It wasn't a command, but a curiosity that pushed her to act. She found him in the observation room, studying the stars through a large window. The soft glow of the distant suns reflected in his eyes, and for a moment, Zarina saw something in him she had never expected. Peace. It wasn't the peace of someone who had been defeated, but the peace of someone who had found their place in the universe, no matter how small or imperfect it may be. She approached him quietly, her footsteps barely making a sound on the smooth floor. Michael didn't turn around, but he knew she was there. "I've been thinking," Zarina said, her voice softer than usual. "You've shown me something I didn't expect. Your people, you are different from what I believed." Michael turned to her, his face neutral but his eyes filled with understanding. Sometimes it takes seeing things from a different perspective to understand them. Zarina's heart skipped a beat. Was he speaking to her directly? The Queen's mind raced. This human was unlike anyone she had ever met. He was not afraid of her power. He wasn't seeking her approval. He was simply speaking the truth. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about him that made her want to understand more. For the first time, Zarina realized that this human was not the primitive creature she had once thought him to be. Instead, he was a mirror, reflecting back at her everything she had failed to see in herself and in her empire. "Maybe," Zarina said quietly, "I have underestimated your kind." Michael met her gaze, his expression calm but knowing. "Maybe we've underestimated ourselves." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the vastness of the universe stretching out before them. Neither spoke, but both felt the shift. Something was changing, and neither of them knew what it would mean for the future. But for the first time, Zarina wasn't sure that her empire would always be the greatest in the galaxy. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. As the days passed, Michael noticed a change in the way the Queen interacted with him. Gone were the cold glares, the dismissive comments. Instead, there was a subtle curiosity in her eyes whenever they spoke. At first, he couldn't quite place it. Zarina, the powerful alien queen, had always looked down on humanity, seeing them as a lesser species. But now when they spoke, there was something different, something softer, though still hidden behind her royal mask. Michael couldn't help but be intrigued by the Queen. He had spent his entire life on Earth, a planet full of struggle, conflict, and survival. He knew what it was like to fight for every scrap of peace, every inch of progress. He had seen the worst of humanity, war, greed, and corruption. But he had also seen the best: compassion, resilience, and the willingness to help others, even at great personal cost. He had grown up hearing stories of great leaders and heroes who had changed the world. And now, here he was, standing before an alien queen who had the power to destroy planets. The contrast was staggering, but Michael knew one thing for sure. No matter how powerful she was, Zarina was still just a person like everyone else. A person who had learned to rule through strength and fear, but never through understanding. And that, Michael realized, was the key. Zarina didn't understand humanity. She saw them as primitive creatures, as beings who were too weak to survive on their own. But what she didn't see was the one thing that had made humanity endure: their ability to keep going, no matter how bad things got. He remembered his own journey, how humanity had struggled through wars, disease, and destruction, but always came out the other side stronger. It wasn't technology or weapons that made them strong. It was their hearts, their ability to keep fighting, to keep loving, to keep moving forward. That was the secret of humanity's strength. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Michael and Zarina found themselves alone in the palace's vast gardens. The stars above them twinkled brightly, casting a soft glow over the scene. Michael stood silently, looking up at the stars, lost in thought. Zarina stood beside him, her gaze fixed on him, as if studying him for the first time. "You seem different," Zarina finally said, her voice low. "You speak of humanity as if it has a purpose, as if it has a strength we cannot understand." Michael turned to her, meeting her gaze. "We do," he replied quietly. "We have a purpose, even if it's not always clear. And our strength isn't in what we have, but in who we are. We've fought wars. We've lost people we loved. We've seen our homes destroyed. And yet we keep going. We find a way to rise up." Zarina frowned, her brows furrowing slightly. "But that is weakness. You fight because you cannot control your destiny." Michael smiled softly, shaking his head. "No, Your Majesty. We fight because we choose our destiny. It's not about control. It's about survival. We fight for the future, not because we have to, but because we want to." Zarina was silent for a long time, her thoughts racing. She had always believed that true strength came from control. Her empire had thrived on that belief. Power, dominance, and the ability to bend others to her will. But what Michael said struck a chord within her. He spoke of survival, yes, but also of choice, of hope. For the first time, Zarina wasn't sure if her way was the only way. She had seen strength in humanity, in a way she had never seen before. It wasn't the strength of a warrior, but the strength of a people who could endure, adapt, and survive no matter the odds. As she looked at Michael, she realized that she had been wrong. Humans weren't just weak, primitive creatures. They were strong in ways she had never imagined. And now, Zarina found herself wondering, could her empire, built on fear and control, learn something from these humans? But that question would have to wait. For now, the queen was left with something she hadn't expected. A deep curiosity, not just about humanity, but about the humans standing before her. Michael had shown her a different side of life, one she had never considered, and it was slowly changing everything she had believed in. For the first time, Zarina wasn't just thinking about her power. She was thinking about the future. And that scared her more than anything. As the days went by, the bond between Zarina and Michael grew stronger, though neither of them fully understood what was happening. They had met as enemies, with Zarina seeing humans as nothing more than primitive creatures. But now, the more they talked, the more she found herself questioning her past beliefs. The human was no longer just a representative from Earth. He had become something more, an enigma she couldn't ignore. Zarina spent her days thinking about the things Michael had said. His words, simple yet profound, stayed with her long after their conversations ended. He spoke of hope, of humanity's resilience in the face of hardship, and of the human spirit's refusal to give up. It was unlike anything she had ever known in her own empire, where power and control were everything. One evening, as Zarina walked through the palace gardens, she found Michael standing by the fountain, staring at the water. There was something peaceful about the way he stood, a quiet strength in him that made her pause. She had seen thousands of soldiers, warriors, and diplomats, but none of them carried themselves like Michael did. He wasn't imposing, but his presence was undeniable. "Do you ever wonder what makes us different from the others?" Zarina asked, her voice soft, but filled with curiosity. Michael turned to face her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Every day. We've been through so much, and yet here we are. We fight, we fall, and we rise again. That's the human way." Zarina studied him, her brow furrowed in thought. "But why? Why keep fighting when the odds are so heavily stacked against you?" Michael's smile faded slightly, and his eyes grew serious. "Because we believe in something. In each other, in our future. We don't just fight for survival. We fight because we want to make the world better. We believe that, no matter what happens, there's always a way forward. And when you have hope, when you fight for something greater than yourself, you find the strength you didn't know you had." Zarina stood in silence, processing his words. There was a weight to them, a truth she hadn't considered before. In her own world, power was everything. Her empire had grown through conquest, through fear, and through control. But Michael wasn't talking about that. He was talking about something far more elusive, something she didn't fully understand yet. She looked at him, noticing how different he was from the others she had encountered. There was no arrogance in him, no hunger for power. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He simply was. It was a strange kind of strength, one that didn't require domination or fear, but belief and perseverance. Zarina had always been the queen of an empire built on strength. She had never imagined that a human could stand before her, challenging her beliefs and making her question everything she had known. And yet, here he was. "I have to admit," Zarina said slowly, "I don't fully understand you, Michael. You humans, you're different. You fight with a strength that I've never seen before." Michael chuckled softly. "Maybe we're not so different after all. We all fight for what we believe in. Some do it with power, and some do it with hope." Zarina felt something shift inside her. It was subtle, but it was there, a recognition that perhaps power wasn't the only path to greatness. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was something more to humanity than what she had originally thought. "I'm beginning to see that," she said quietly, her eyes locking with his. "Maybe there's more to this alliance than I originally believed." Michael gave her a small nod, a gesture of understanding. "I think we're just getting started." As they stood together in the quiet garden, Zarina realized something profound. She was no longer looking at Michael as a mere human. She was seeing him as an equal. And for the first time, she wasn't just thinking about the future of her empire. She was thinking about a future with him. A future where hope, not fear, would lead the way. The days seemed to blur together for Zarina as she spent more time with Michael. The queen had always been a creature of logic and control, but now she found herself struggling with emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. The discussions they had, simple yet profound, were changing her in ways she couldn't ignore. It was no longer about power or dominance. It was about something deeper, something she had never considered before. Trust. Zarina was used to being in control. As the queen of an empire that stretched across galaxies, she was accustomed to having all the answers, making the decisions, and dictating the future. But with Michael, she felt a shift. It was as though he had opened her eyes to a new way of thinking, a way of thinking that didn't rely on fear or control, but on something more subtle, understanding. She had seen it in him from the very beginning. His resilience, his ability to adapt to any situation, and most of all, his unwavering belief in the potential of humanity. Michael had shown her that strength didn't always come from weapons or technology. Sometimes, it came from the heart, from the simple act of holding on when everything else was falling apart. And now, Zarina was standing at a crossroads. She had spent her entire life believing in the superiority of her people. They were the strongest, the smartest, the most advanced. They had conquered planets, destroyed enemies, and shaped the galaxy to their will. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how empty that was. Her people had built an empire on fear, on force. But in doing so, they had lost something. They had lost the very thing that made them alive. Hope. One evening, Zarina stood alone in the palace's grand hall, gazing at the stars through the massive windows. The sight was breathtaking, but her mind was elsewhere. She had been wrestling with the decision for days now. What was she supposed to do with the knowledge Michael had given her? Could she truly change her ways? Could she let go of the rigid beliefs that had defined her for so long? As she stood there, lost in thought, Michael appeared beside her. He didn't speak at first, just stood quietly next to her, gazing at the stars as well. Zarina could feel the warmth of his presence beside her, a calmness that seemed to contrast with the storm of thoughts in her mind. "I've been thinking," Zarina finally said, her voice softer than usual, "about everything we've discussed, about humanity, about you." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "I don't know if I can change. I've ruled this empire for so long, and all I've known is strength and control. But I've come to realize that maybe there's more to leadership than just power." Michael looked at her with understanding. "There is," he said quietly. "There's compassion, understanding, and trust. Leadership isn't just about dominating others. It's about inspiring them to believe in something greater than themselves." Zarina felt a weight lift from her chest at his words. She had always been afraid of losing control, afraid of what would happen if she allowed herself to feel or to trust. But here, in this moment, with Michael standing beside her, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I think I'm ready," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Ready to try something different. Maybe there's a future where we can build something, not just with power, but with hope, with understanding. A future where humans and my people can stand together, not as rulers and subjects, but as equals." Michael's face broke into a small, knowing smile. "That's all I've ever wanted." Zarina felt something shift within her, a decision made, a path chosen. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. She knew that there would be those in her empire who would resist this new way of thinking. There would be those who would see it as weakness, as a betrayal of everything they had fought for. But Zarina also knew that she had to try. For herself, for her people, and for the future she now believed was possible. As they stood together in the quiet of the hall, the stars above shining down on them, Zarina made a vow to herself. She would lead with compassion, with understanding, and with hope. It was a new beginning, not just for her, but for her empire, and for humanity as well. And as Michael stood by her side, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following days were filled with discussions, debates, and plans. Zarina had made her decision. She was no longer the queen who ruled with an iron fist, whose every word carried the weight of an empire built on power and fear. Instead, she was trying to build something new, something different. And that meant learning to trust others, especially humanity. The queen had invited Michael to her private chambers once again. But this time, it was not for a test or a casual conversation. It was to discuss the future, a future where humans and her people could work together. She was about to take a bold step, and she needed his help. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Zarina began, her voice calm but determined. "Humanity has a strength I never saw before. You've shown me that. Now, I'm ready to take the next step." Michael stood across from her, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "What are you asking, Your Majesty?" Zarina's gaze softened as she took a deep breath. "I'm asking for your help in forming an alliance. A real one. Not just a political arrangement, but a true partnership. Humans and my people, together, building something stronger than either of us alone." For the first time in many years, Zarina felt vulnerable. The decision she was making could cost her everything. There were factions in her empire who believed that the future of their people lay in their dominance, not in equality or cooperation with other species. If they found out what she was considering, they might turn against her. They might even try to remove her from the throne. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Michael took a step closer, his face serious. "What you're proposing is a huge step, Your Majesty. Not just for your people, but for mine as well. But you're right. It's time for something different." Zarina met his gaze, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "I know it won't be easy. There will be those who resist. I have spent my entire life building an empire on fear and power, and now I am asking my people to believe in something else. I'm asking them to believe in hope." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's going to take time for both sides to trust each other. But I believe it can work. If both of us are willing to put in the effort, we can make this happen." Zarina felt a weight lift from her chest. For the first time, she felt truly free. Free from the shackles of her own expectations, free from the fear that had once ruled her every decision. For the first time, she felt hope. "I'm ready to take that risk," Zarina said, her voice steady. "I will speak to my people. I will tell them that the future lies in partnership, not domination. And I will offer humanity a place beside us, not beneath us." Michael's face softened with pride. "You won't regret this, Your Majesty. I promise you, humanity is more than ready. Together, we can build something better." As the two of them stood together, discussing the future, Zarina realized that this was more than just a political move. It was a shift in the very way she saw the world. She had been so focused on power, on control, that she had never realized what it truly meant to lead. True leadership was about inspiring others to believe in something greater than themselves, and that was something Michael had shown her. The sun began to set outside the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. The stars slowly appeared in the sky, a reminder of the vast universe that lay beyond them. Zarina looked out at the stars, a sense of peace washing over her. This was only the beginning, she knew. But for the first time, she wasn't worried about the future. She knew that, together, humanity and her people could face whatever came next. It was a new era, one built on hope, trust, and the belief that anything was possible. Zarina turned back to Michael, her eyes full of determination. "Let's begin," she said. And with that simple phrase, a new chapter in their history began. The announcement came sooner than Zarina had expected. Her decision to form an alliance with humanity had sent shockwaves through her empire. But to her surprise, the reaction was not entirely negative. Some of her advisors were furious, questioning her leadership and accusing her of betraying their legacy. Others were confused, unsure whether this new path would lead to success or failure. Yet there were those who saw the potential in her vision. A few trusted generals, once loyal only to the crown's power, stepped forward, offering their support. They believed that Zarina's willingness to consider a new future was the right path. Michael had been by her side through it all, helping to bridge the gap between his people and the Queen's empire. He had spent countless hours meeting with the council, explaining the benefits of the alliance, assuring them that humanity's strength was not something to be feared, but something that could complement the empire's power. Slowly, the seeds of understanding began to take root. Now, it was time to make it official. The momentous ceremony was being held in the great hall of the palace. Leaders from both worlds had gathered, their faces filled with anticipation. Zarina stood at the center of the room, her regal presence commanding attention. Beside her was Michael, standing as her equal. The two of them were not simply diplomats today. They were symbols of the new future they were building together. Zarina looked out over the assembly, her eyes scanning the faces of her people. She had seen many emotions in their eyes. Fear, doubt, hope. But today, she hoped to change everything. This wasn't just about politics. It was about a new way of thinking, a new way of living. As the ceremony began, Zarina stepped forward, her voice echoing through the hall. "Today we stand together, not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals. Today we build a future where power is not defined by domination, but by partnership. We have learned that strength is not in control, but in understanding, in hope." Michael stood beside her, his face calm but filled with pride. He had never imagined that this day would come. But now that it was here, he knew that it was only the beginning. Humanity has endured countless challenges, but it is only by working together that we can move forward, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "We have so much to offer one another. Together, we can achieve greatness." The crowd listened intently, the weight of the moment settling in. Zarina and Michael exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They were not just two leaders from different worlds. They were the beginning of something far greater than either could have imagined. The queen raised her hand, signaling the final moment of the ceremony. With a simple gesture, she extended it to Michael. I offer you my hand, human, as a partner in this new era. Let this be the start of a new chapter for both our peoples. Michael took her hand firmly, a smile spreading across his face. Together, he said, his voice filled with hope. The crowd erupted in applause, a mixture of surprise and excitement filling the air. Zarina felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of pride that she had never known before. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for both humanity and her people. And in that moment, Zarina knew that they had taken the first step towards something extraordinary. As the ceremony concluded and the leaders returned to their discussions, Zarina found herself looking out at the stars once again. She had once seen them as a reminder of her empire's power, but now they symbolized something else. The future. The future was bright, and it was a future she would face with humanity, side by side. The first few months after the ceremony were both challenging and rewarding for Zarina and Michael. The alliance between their people had begun, but it was not without its difficulties. There were factions within Zarina's empire who still believed in the old ways, those who saw humanity as beneath them and who resisted the queen's decision. They whispered behind closed doors, skeptical of the future she had chosen. But Zarina stood firm, determined to prove that this was the right path. Meanwhile, Michael worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the two species. He met with human leaders, explaining the new alliance and ensuring that Earth's interests were protected. He also spent time with the Queen, discussing the details of the alliance and working through the challenges they faced. It was not easy, but they were both committed to making it work. One evening, as Zarina and Michael stood in the palace garden, overlooking the glowing city below, they talked about the future once again. We've made progress, Michael said, his voice full of quiet pride. But I know we still have a long way to go. Some people still don't trust us, on both sides. Zarina nodded, her eyes focused on the stars above. I know, but we've already achieved something no one thought possible. We've brought our people together. That's the first step. Michael looked at her, noticing the soft, thoughtful expression on her face. It's hard, isn't it? Letting go of everything you've known. Zarina turned to him, her expression softening. Yes, it is. For so long, I believed that power was everything. But now I see that strength comes in different forms. It's not about fear or control. It's about understanding. It's about giving others the chance to rise, not just keeping them under your heel. Michael smiled, a look of admiration in his eyes. You're doing great, Zarina. I've never met anyone who's willing to change as much as you have. Your people will see that soon enough. Zarina looked away, her gaze falling to the garden below. I hope so. I can only guide them. The rest is up to them. Michael stepped closer to her, his voice calm and reassuring. And it's up to us. Together, we'll show them what we can build. Zarina's heart swelled with a feeling she hadn't expected. For the first time, she felt truly hopeful, not just for her empire, but for humanity as well. There was a future ahead of them, one that was uncertain but full of possibility. They had made mistakes in the past, both of them, but now they had a chance to make things right. It would take time, effort, and sacrifices, but she was ready. We've already started, Zarina said, her voice quiet but full of determination. The road ahead may be long, but I believe it's worth it. The two of them stood together, their hands brushing lightly as they gazed up at the stars. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Zarina felt like they could face whatever challenges came their way, together. As the night deepened, a new chapter in their history began, a chapter of hope, understanding, and a shared dream for a better future. And in that moment, Zarina knew that her people, her empire, and humanity were no longer separated by differences. They were united by something far stronger, a belief in each other. The future was theirs to shape, and it was just the beginning.